Morning, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform, this time with my good friend, Dennis Howlett from Diginomica. Now, you can see I've got this really ugly, bright-looking shirt on. It's because we have the Super Bowl in town this Sunday, where my team, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, hopes to win another Super Bowl. And we have an ageless wonder called Tom Brady, who's had a remarkable run for 20 years. He's trying for his 7th Super Bowl win. It's a good metaphor for what Dennis and I are about to discuss. SAP is turning 48. Can it throw another Hail Mary with something it announced last week called Rise with SAP? Dennis, welcome aboard. Tell us a little bit about your background. Everyone knows you, but why don't you share things that people may not know?
Hi, Vinnie. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I started out life as a very reluctant, I have to say, trainee accountant working for a bullion merchant in London's Hatton Garden. My office used to overlook the bullion yard where you'd see gold and other precious metals coming and going. You know, they really do exist. And we used to set the silver price every day at 11 o'clock, along with companies that no longer exist, really, in many senses.
So you worked with the Hunt brothers. You cornered the market.
Yeah, no, not really. And it was where they taught me control accounting. It's one of the most boring things on the planet. But they also taught me how to do investigations into fraud very quickly as well. Those were the days when you had to hunt through tickets. Oh, it was a nightmare. I spent time in civil engineering. I spent time in home construction, public construction, farming, batch engineering. At one stage, I owned a foundry engineering plant. When I lived in France, I owned a small microbrewery because beer's been a passion for almost my entire life. And eventually ended up in as a partner in a firm of chartered accountants over here in the UK, where I put my hand up to do the technology stuff. And the very first machine that I bought was an Apple luggable. Not an Apple, what is it? Apricot luggable. On the false premise that technology had reached its apex and had moved too quickly, and that was it. It was game over, right? And I was comparing that with a previous business that I'd been in where we ran System 36 and all that stuff. So anyway, that was kind of like that. Retired at the grand old age of 40, and with nothing better to do, embarked on a career in media and consulting and analysis and looking at this whole enterprise game. In 1993, came across this little company called SAP, and it kind of went from there.
Well,
8 years ago, I co-founded Diginomica with a bunch of buddies that I'd known for a long time. And surprise, surprise, we're still together that many years on. So there you go.
Dennis, what have you not done in your career? Listen, though, let's talk about the subject at hand. Your take on what you heard last week from Kristen Klein and team as they introduced Rise with SAP.
Okay. So initially, a lot of people were confused, especially in the sort of ecosystem that's fairly vocal around this. A lot of people looked at this and thought this is HANA Enterprise Cloud Platform version 2. They thought it was Leonardo version 2. And pretty much all of those people missed the significance of the Signavio acquisition that's coming up, which for me is the centerpiece for this thing, right? So SAP kind of positions this as a business transformation platform, or business transformation as a service, I think they call it.
Yep.
Well, that's bullshit. There is no way that is business transformation as a service. It's the start of any form of change or transformation. There's a lot more to it than that. But I understand, you know, they, like every other tech vendor, they want to pick up a term that seems cool, sexy, and one thing or another. But let's face it, SAP isn't cool, sexy, or anything else for that matter. So there was that, and to me, it's the most aggressive move that Christian Klein has taken in the last year since he became sole CEO. And for me, at least, if they get it right, and there's an awful lot of if with SAP, as you well know, Vinnie, it's fundamentally a good move, right? But it's a necessary move, because if you look at their customer count, I think it stands at, they quote something like 45,000 ECC stroke R3 stroke S4 customers. Well, that figure's been constant since about 2012, right? So in reality, because they took, just to put this again clearly, nowadays when they talk about the number of S4 HANA wins that they have in a quarter or a year or whatever it is, they say, oh, X% are net new, okay? So let's assume that net new means actually net new greenfield, never been an SAP customer before. And the number that they normally quote is in the range 40-45%. Well, you don't have to be a rock star genius mathematician to figure out that they haven't been winning customers. They've been losing customers, right? Because that number's constant since about 2012. And they have the problem of getting around about 30,000 customers across the S4 HANA line. They've just not been able to do that, yeah? And that group of customers, it's very, very important SAP gets them across the line, because otherwise they really do start to lose market share, simply because there are potentially at least half a dozen companies that I can think of that could take their market away from them. So they've got to get them across the line. How do you do it, right? And
so Dennis, my take was a little bit different, right? I was actually impressed that Christian in his keynote basically took a swipe at the term simplification. My God, if you look at the whole concept he presented, he presented, Jürgen presented, Thomas presented. These guys are brilliant young architects, visionaries. They don't think small. But I'm worried about, my God, who can, it reminded me of a presentation I saw from Thomas Curry and many others at Oracle. Just an encyclopedic knowledge of all the acquisitions they had made, right? But then you step away and go, how can the field ever talk in any remotely close level of detail of so much complexity? How can the partners, right? I mean, it is S4, it is cloud platform, it's analytics cloud, it's the seven sisters, the cloud acquisitions, and now they've thrown in business process intelligence, they've thrown in Microsoft Streams, they're offering to take over hyperscaler management, SI management. Just the package just seems so complex.
Okay, so you're right. The bigger problem is that SAP has got no idea what's going on in its ecosystem, in its customer portfolio, right? Every SAP system, and you know this because you've implemented some of this stuff in the past, Vinnie, and I've looked at systems that SAP's got. Every landscape is different, yeah? And because it's traditionally been either client server, mainframe, or remote data center, SAP has no idea what's in those landscapes, yeah? But here's the other thing. The customers don't know what's in the landscapes either. And if you don't know what's in the landscape, how can you scope anything? You can't, right? Now, you know, you might say, well, this is a little bit strange. You know, we're talking about some of the world's leading companies. Well, it's surprising just how many applications are kicking around in ecosystems. I mean, you'll have seen this yourself. I talked to Mike Ettling the other day, CEO of Unit 4, and he was saying that in a small startup that he'd looked at, they found over 120 applications. Imagine what it's like if you're a Siemens and Nestle or something else. I mean, it's just huge. So, and here, this is where I see the importance of Signavio. Signavio allows you to document, analyze, and subsequently mine business processes. And that gets you to the starting point of understanding what your landscape looks like. And when you can do that, which is a relatively small scale project, I have to say. I mean, we're not talking millions of dollars here. Then you start to understand A, what you're looking at, B, where the inefficiencies are, C, where the improvements are. And SAP, for its part, and especially since we're talking pure native cloud, and that's the important point with Signavio compared with, for example, Solonis, then SAP now has a database of what's going on, you know, and what the best practices, quote unquote, I hate that term, but I understand why it's used, exist within the landscape across however many customers are able to get this thing into. Yeah, that is the start of reducing this massive complexity.
Let's go back to, you know, Signavio used to be Professor Scheer in the ECC world, right?
Yep.
BPM in that era, and the integrators were nuts, customizing the heck out of R3 and ECC.
Yeah,
I worry that Signavio and continued armies of SIs are being given a green light to go customize the heck out of S4. How do you?
No, that's not what they're being given, Vinnie. I mean, they may look at it that way because what do consultants and SIs want to do? They want to put people, armies of people into customers, don't they? Right? They sell hours, which they need to have utilization and so forth, and that world is gone. It's absolutely gone because who can afford it any longer, right? What value are you going to get out of putting another army of, name your SI consultancy organization here, just to do a shift to something like S4? Where's the value? There isn't any.
So honestly, I thought when, you know, you were pre-briefed more than I was, but I thought this was going to be about, RISE was going to be about how execution, right? Instead, it turned out to be more of a product extension. They talked a little bit about execution towards the end, talked a little about contracting towards the end, but I wish they had focused on exactly what you're saying. You know, the SIs during the pandemic have learned to do virtual products. They're using your tooling. I didn't hear any of that, right? So I got the feeling that SAP used this as more of a, hey, we're extending BPI, it'll do exactly what you're saying. And by the way, you know, we have an extended relationship with Microsoft, but they were light on execution and light on contracting, which are hairy topics.
Yeah. So look, this is what they talked about there isn't new, right? About 11 months ago, I think it was. Yes, it was 11 months ago. I sat in an office in London with Christian, and he said, I went with a laundry list of things that I wanted him to think about. But he said to me, he said, we have to own the application layer, right? He said, and we got to figure out how to do this. Now, why was that? Well, very simply, because the hyperscalers are taking it away from them. Yeah. And that was the alternative to the acquisition, growth acquisition strategy that was undertaken by the previous administration in that company, right? You either grow organically and develop organically, or you acquire. Not much in between. And previous 10 years they've been acquiring, yeah. And then, but at the same time, the core has largely been ignored, yeah. Basically in stasis. So all of a sudden, client's faced with a problem. What do? They've been working on this for the last year. Is what it comes down to, and what he is saying is, in RISE with SAP having what he calls a single handshake, what you and I might call a single throat to choke, he is able, he thinks, to be able to bring together the infrastructure side of things, the have a play on the process side of things, the BPI side of things, be able to get some degree of control over the SIs, well, I think that's a bit of an illusion, while at the same time being able to push the S4 story. And from him, that brings all of that together, okay? In the story.
If that is the intention, I applaud
it. It is the intention. It is the intention.
It is, I applaud him for that. But if you look at the sequence in which his keynote went, the SIs came first, hyperscalers came like fourth
Yeah.
or fifth in the second.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
it sounded like the old SAP. Oh, I got the Accentures, I got the Deloittes to help me out.
Well,
And
he's got to
almost
say that, hasn't he?
Almost
He's
a
got-
grudging, almost a
He's-
grudging hyperscaler acknowledgement. Like you, I met him a couple of years ago, and I said, Christian, I'm very worried that S4 is mostly coming out on-premise or in private cloud. You really need to emphasize the public cloud a lot more. So good news is they are moving more to the public cloud, but I think they're worried about losing the platform to the hyperscalers. And
Well, they've lost it. It's not losing it; they've lost it.
I don't think they've accepted it yet. Let's talk about the hyperscalers. So, prominent at the bottom of the big four, Alibaba and AWS and Azure and Google, was IBM. That was, to me, where the hell did that come from? I know people are moving to hybrid clouds, but that was kind of a surprise. On the other hand, Oracle was noticeably absent. Now, during the pandemic, like it or not, Oracle OCI has shown some momentum. And let's face it, in the SAP customer base, Oracle database is still a big factor. So do you think that's I know it's a competitive threat to bring Oracle in, but aren't customers going to make their decisions based on their priorities?
Customers are going to make their decisions based on what problem they're trying to solve today, which is a different way of looking at it, right? I mean, the reality, Vinnie, is that, okay, let's go back to 1993 when I first came across this company, right? They very, very quickly became the center of the enterprise universe. You know that yourself. I mean,
Absolutely.
You're doing projects all over the world, right?
Yep.
And I can remember that if you wanted to have a demonstration of SAP, you would pay them $7,500 or $10,000, and they would produce you PowerPoint, right?
Yep.
And then you'd embark on a multi-million-dollar project, which might get over the line in 3 years. Yeah. Where are we now? 27 years on. You haven't got a snowflake's chance in hell of being able to get those kind of projects going.
Yep.
At all. Period. So what do you do? What do you, if you're SAP, what do you do? It's very, very hard. I mean, you've mentioned IBM. That's marketing talk, Vinnie. You don't honestly think that that IBM's going to put a lot of money into this, do you? Really? And if you look at I looked at all those quotes from the SIs, and what struck me was just how bland they were. Why? Well, do you want to give up application landscape management? If you're an SI, if you're an Accenture or a Deloitte, absolutely not. But that's on the table. Do you want to give up customizations? Absolutely not.
You made a great point, Brian, Dennis, about, you just can't justify the big projects anymore, multi-year projects and so on.
No.
So during the pandemic, what I saw was they actually were very interested in Greg Tom's portion of SAP, right? The whole Seven Sisters, the cloud acquisitions.
Yeah.
It's called the Amplify Initiative. I also saw a number of small vertical apps, be it e-commerce related, warehouse fulfillment related, telemedicine related, distance learning in higher education, last mile delivery in restaurants, and so on. I didn't see SAP try to go after any of those markets. So if the market is telling you, give me bite size and very, very vertical applications, why is SAP resisting that? It keeps pushing S4.
Okay. This comes back to the center of the universe problem, right? 1993, 90 through to 99, easily, no shadow of a doubt. If you want enterprise software, and if you're a global 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 business, you buy SAP, no question, right?
Oh, I was at Gartner, and I probably helped thousands of companies make that decision. So I can take credit for.
So you're the one that takes the credit, right? Okay. And I remember those days, Vinnie. I mean, I can remember in 1997, 98, I think it was, that for me to be able to get a conversation with you, I'd probably have to wait 3 months, right?
Oh, for you, Dennis, I would have opened the door. I would have taken a call at 3 a.m. But
Yeah, right. Okay. No, but seriously, in order to get time with somebody like yourself, people like myself, it would take forever, because you guys were so damn busy, right? 27 years on, IT landscapes are much, much bigger, and SAP has shrunk as a percentage of that.
sure.
Okay. It is no longer the central thing that everybody needs. Okay. Unless you're in a relatively small company where your where your SAP investment is proportionally higher. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Coca-Colas and the Colgates, even the Apples of this world, the relative spend on SAP and ERP landscapes in particular is actually quite small.
Dennis, I see that as, I blame that a little bit on SAP's fixation with HANA around 2010. They missed out on many markets that emerged in the last decade. So Google and Facebook ran away with all the social media marketing dollars, right? The whole IoT market, GE and Siemens and those guys took advantage of that. I mean, there were market after market that SAP just saw drift by them, didn't do anything. They were so fixated on platform and HANA that I think they lost the functional vision of what was happening in the market.
Well, again, there are two problems here, Vinnie. I mean, Hasso Plattner once said to me, he said, the biggest mistake I ever made was in 1975 when Nestle came to me. They were our biggest customer. We needed them. And they said, oh, can we have access to the code? And I said, yes. And that was the start of customizations, right? The second thing that Hasso agreed with me about, and this is a few years ago now, so I'm probably going to get the timing wrong, but he reckoned that the vertical market expertise that allowed them to create 20 some markets was basically didn't exist any longer in the company. And he regrets very much that they allowed that to happen. Look, I mean, again, going back to the 90s, I remember attending my very first SAP Sapphire, and I remember looking over the balcony down into the exhibition hall, and there you saw the oil and gas tent, for example, yeah? And you had BP and Chevron and Esso and all those other people, all in their corporate gear, clearly proud to be SAP customers, all vying with each other to, who could look the best, yeah? Very proud to be an SAP customer. Incredibly impressive, because if you're a tier 2 or tier 3 player in that industry, you're going to be looking at those guys and thinking, wow, what is it that they know that I don't? Does anybody honestly do that today? I don't think so. At least not as far as that company is concerned. And
so let's go back to Rise with SAP. Clearly a very complex message. And like you say, different people have taken away, were surprised by what they were expecting and what they heard, right? Mm. How does SAP roll it out? I mean, beyond the three brilliant guys, Christian, Thomas, Jürgen, how does somebody 3 levels down in the field or in the partner try to explain something that big, something that complex?
Well, again, this comes back to a problem that SAP has, and that is that they're very used to going into a customer because they've got a very large portfolio of SKUs, depending on who you want to believe. It's something like 30,000 or something crazy like that. And you will say to you're a customer, and you say, listen, I've got this problem. You say, yeah, okay, fine, we'll come along. And then they come along mob-handed and immediately try and boil the ocean, when what I really want to do is solve this problem over here. Guess what? They get qualified out real quick because nobody wants to sit there and listen to them yap on about the portfolio. If you were to listen to an SAP rep, you'd get the impression that they have a solution for every problem on the planet. They could probably solve world peace if you gave them half a chance, or at least they think so. But that, of course, is not true. And I mean, if you've spoken to Jeff Scott recently, the CEO of ASUG, he'll tell you, he said there's appetite for short 3-month projects. We'll do them with SAP if that's appropriate, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. But you come to me with a multi-year X million pound transformation project, at least that's what you're calling it. You know, I'm not even going to give you time of day. I can't give you time of day because it's sucking too much oxygen out of existing budgets, which are difficult enough as it is. So,
you know, what I've seen is like Salesforce has come up with work.com.
Yeah.
They're into all kinds of vaccine management, very relevant applications for today. Like Workday's come out with a diversity-focused wide product. They've got a vaccine management product. They've been coming up with these bite-sized, very, very timely applications. And it seems like SAP is still pushing I am the department store, I can give you what you want, right? And so it'd be interesting to see how RISE is rolled out.
But you've got to remember, though, Vinnie, that they are used to dealing very often at a very high level with some of the largest companies in the world, right? You know, if Christian turns up at Davos, you can be darn sure that 100% of his world-leading customers are going to be there, represented at a very high level.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you've been that successful, very, very hard to look beyond that, you know, except that's what they're having to do now. And he knows it.
Well, Dennis, so I saw a tweet where you said you're writing not quite a book, but a long form report on your, 30 years now of looking at SAP. Is that true?
No, well, as I've thought about RISE, Vinnie, and I hope people have managed to get something from what I've been telling you here, and that's that the history of SAP plays directly into the problems that it's trying to solve today for itself. Yeah, it's specifically brought in people now. Julia White is one, Sabina Bienbeck is the other. Those people are specifically at that business in order to get SAP into a modern 21st century way of thinking, because that's been the fundamental problem for so many years. Yeah, they've been incredibly successful, but trying to get those very clever people that have been around that company and done fantastic work for many, many years to think about what's needed for the 21st century has been incredibly difficult. You know, Klein gets that. Okay. Now, and when you're in an acquisition, growth acquisition mode, you don't need to worry about that too much. But when you're faced with the problems that he's faced, you absolutely have to. And the clock's ticking. It's as simple as that. The clock's ticking. There are too many smart people in other companies and in relative startups and so forth, quite happy to take a piece of what SAP's got away from them. And that would be a death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what they need to avoid. That's what Signavio and RISE with SAP is all about at the end of the day. But will they get the vertical market element right? Something you've talked about for many years, something that I've talked about. I know that they're working on it, but have they got time? Don't know.
Well, I mean, look, Klein, I'm impressed with the young executive team that he has built. And,
yeah,
you know, I mean, it's a go back to my Super Bowl analogy. It's a young man's sport. And, you know, the good news is SAP is looking vibrant. I just worry that the complexity is just so big and they're so dependent on partners who often misuse that opportunity, right? We've seen that over and over again. So,
well, you've been very critical of the SIs in the past, Vinnie, but and we could easily continue to be critical of them, but they've been affected by COVID as well. They've realized that they have to change.
Absolutely.
They realize that they have to move in a different direction. So this has been a good dose of hard reality for those guys. And by and large, they don't have software to sell. They have services, right? This is an opportunity for them to start selling software. Much better business to be in. And SAP is happy for them to come along for the ride. I completely get that. I can see where that goes. Whether everybody gets it at this point in time, who knows? But history, as I say, I believe history is a great teacher here. It's, it doesn't always repeat, but it certainly echoes, if we will.
Well, Dennis, if you do end up writing that masterpiece,
I don't know if it'll be a masterpiece. It'll be a work in progress, that's for sure.
Whatever it is, come back to the other series or one called Analyst Can, and I won't jabber. I'll give you 20 minutes to present the highlights from that. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Promise to come back on that.
Yeah.
We could spend hours talking about SAP. You and I go back a little too long in the SAP world.
Some of us would say, but here's one thing though, Vinnie, and I mean, I've been very critical in this thing. Never bet against them. It's a really bad idea to bet against that company. At least, again, historically, so many people have said, "Oh, it's over, and it ain't over."
Not at all. Not at all. You know, when you have 400,000 customers. I was in Bangkok now 2 years ago in one of their events. I was just blown away with Korean and Burmese and all kinds of customers. I'm like, no other enterprise customer has this reach. And when you look at the vertical reach, right, they still have just amazing customers, and that is their strength. I mean, for all the mistakes they have made, the customer base is still their strength.
Well, here's something that I have not spoken about, but bear in mind what you just said. Because SAP has this global customer base and a pretty big presence in APJ, right? And they've just brought the president of APJ over into the center. You can say what you like about that particular individual, but it's APJ. Guess where all the innovation's happening in the world? Hello? China, Vietnam, South Korea, Taiwan. Where are those? Oh, APJ. Don't tell me that's a coincidence.
And Scott, I was impressed. I met Scott during that visit. I was impressed. So, don't get me wrong. SAP has formidable assets.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyone who writes them off, you're absolutely right, is nuts. But short term, I just wish they would start thinking small. And this to me was more big thinking when the market may not be completely ready. It's almost
Christian probably needs to put out some more examples. He talked about the company that had the problem at Christmas. Yeah, that was a short-term supply chain problem. I know which company it is, but he hasn't mentioned it, so I won't. But that was a very short project. He's talked to me about a bunch of these tiny little projects, right? And I've said, why don't we know about this stuff, right? And he kind of looks at me a little bit blank. But the reality is, is SAP marketing's just been shocking. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, they can't even get the brands right without confusing everybody, That I think will change because they brought in somebody very specific on products who's got very deep experience of this, who we can only hope is going to sit down and say, listen, lads, we need to sort this out. And they've got to be able to talk to customers. They've got to talk to the customer problem. Yeah. So he did something that I've not seen before, and that was to talk to some of those issues. Yeah. But they just need a lot more of that. That was for me very, very good, because you don't often hear that from a CEO talking about that.
Well, Dennis, thank you for your perspective. We will see how this rolls out. And like I said, look forward to having you back. Talk about your masterpiece.
Funny old 25 minutes, wasn't it, Vinnie? It's now 40. I knew that wouldn't work, but there we go. It's too much to talk about with this company, isn't it? Right?
But we can keep doing it so long as the audience doesn't mind it. I'm sure other vendors will resent it, but we could certainly talk more about SAP every few weeks.
Sure.
Thank you, Dennis. And maybe throw in a cricket match or two and make it a little more exciting. Not just talk about American football and Super Bowls.
Let's talk about cricket next time round, Vinnie. Your newfound way to watch paint dry, right?
Exactly. Well, you'll have to wear your cricket blazers and Maybe you have a bat nearby.
Yeah, okay.
All right, Dennis, thank you.
Cheers.